Good morning, everyone. I'm Russ Cohen, and here we are along the glorious riverwalk footpath along the Housatonic River in the scenic town of Great Barrington, Massachusetts in the Berkshires. And we're here this morning to look at the edible wild plants that are growing along Riverwalk. And this is a great place to see and learn about edible wild plants. It's not a great place to actually pick and harvest them, but it's a great place to learn about them. All right, I've just popped over on the other side of the fence to point out a couple remnant invasive species along Riverwalk. So since Riverwalk was established, this is going back more than 20 years ago, the folks here have been very good about repressing the growth of the invasives and promoting the growth of the native plants. But the challenge with invasive species is you have to maintain eternal vigilance in order to stay on top of them. Otherwise, they will attempt to sneak back and reestablish themselves. And one of those species that is very true about is this one right here. So this is called Japanese knotweed, which is at or near the top of the ecological blacklist because it's very ecologically disruptive. And I'm happy to say we're only finding a few stems of this species here along Riverwalk because this is a persistent problem along rivers throughout the Northeast. And one of the reasons is this plant takes advantage of a natural phenomenon called ice scour, where in a typical river system during the winter, the rivers freeze up, and then in the late winter, early spring, as the ice begins to thaw, big chunks of ice will flow down the river and tear into the riverbank and disrupt it. And the knotweed exploits that opportunity because this plant primarily spreads vegetatively through its rhizomes. And a little bit of the knotweed rhizome can get embedded in the bank thanks to the ice scour, and a new population starts there. So that's why knotweed and rivers are an unfortunate combination. But this plant is highly edible and very yummy. It's beyond the edible stage right now, as I talked to you at the end of May. The right time to harvest this plant to eat it is from late April into early May. And what I'm harvesting are the fat sprouts of this plant. So the best place to look at if you're going to harvest it to eat it is in a patch where you're seeing many, many stems of last year's growth, and it will look reddish brown and they'll look like bamboo, like dried bamboo. This plant isn't related to bamboo at all, though. It's actually related to rhubarb, and it tastes like rhubarb, which I'll get to in just a second. So in a spot where you're seeing all the dried stalks from the previous year's growth, look for a bunch of shoots coming up. And the shoots will be about 1.5 feet tall at the right stage for harvesting, and they'll have little red dots on the stem. And it shows up a little bit here, and then a cluster of leaves at the top, so you won't see any leaves at all on the stalks at the right stage for harvesting. And I wouldn't bother to harvest a skinny little thing like this. I'm looking for stalks that are at least 3/4 of an inch in diameter, and they'll be very soft and pliable at that stage. And so you just cut them off at ground level and then lop off the top cluster leaves, and then you have a stalk about this long. And then what you would want to do is peel the outer layer off, which is stringy. So there's nothing poisonous about it. It's just that skin can get caught in your teeth. So take that bit off, and then you'll have this peeled hollow tube, which you can eat right on the spot if you want. It's tart and juicy, kind of like a Granny Smith apple, or you can chop it up and use it instead of rhubarb in virtually any recipe calling for rhubarb. So in my foraging book, I've got a recipe for strawberry knotweed pie that virtually everybody I feed that to prefer over strawberry rhubarb pie. It's that good. And if you don't want to be challenged by making a pie with the pie crust and the latticework top and all that stuff, you can just stew the knotweed pieces like you would stewed rhubarb. So any way you use rhubarb, you can use the knotweed. So and this plant has medicinal values too. There's a chemical particularly in the rhizomes called resveratrol, that herbalists will extract from the rhizomes and make tinctures from it and treat people with Lyme disease and other ailments. And it's not an area that I have a lot of expertise in. I just want to share that information with you so that you know. So very bad news ecologically, but may have some other values to the plant, which is good to know. All right, then also another invasive species we're finding here along the riverbank. I gathered some Dames Rocket on the other side of the fence, which is not something anybody else should do. I just did it for the purpose of being able to show this plant and teach it to you. Here at Riverwalk, we encourage people to stay on the trail and enjoy the foliage from the trail. So anyway, this is a non-native, actually an invasive plant called Dames Rocket, that was planted in people's gardens, and it's escaped from cultivation, and you often see it growing wild along rivers. And this particular specimen I gathered is kind of purpley in color, but you'll also see a white version of this, and often the white and the purpley versions are growing right next to each other, so it makes this plant very easy to identify at a distance. So while the entire part of this plant is edible, I tend to just eat the flowers because it's fun to eat flowers. And although, as I said, this plant comes in a purpley color and white color, I tend to just use the purple colors because purple flowers are funner color than just white flowers. So you can just eat these straight off the plant into your mouth, and they have a sweet, garlicky, radishy flavor. They're quite nice. So you could use these right into salads just like that, or you could use these to decorate other foods. And you can even take a flower cluster like this and stick it in some water in a little vase or glass in your refrigerator, and they should keep for several days without going bad. Or you could just throw them into a plastic bag and serve them later, so they won't wilt right away. And so as this is an invasive species, this offers a guilt-free foraging opportunity. You don't have to worry about adverse ecological implications of picking it. Now, you could say, well, it's a pretty flower and maybe I shouldn't pick it because other people like to look at it. And I guess you could say something about that. But as far as ecologists are concerned, they'd be thrilled if you picked and ate as much of this plant as you possibly could. So when I teach this plant, Dames Rocket, to people, I often hear someone chime in and say, oh, that's phlox, isn't it? And it actually isn't phlox. And there's an easy way to tell Dames Rocket apart from phlox if you know what to look for. All phlox family flowers have 5 petals. You'll see that these have 4 petals. This is actually a member of the mustard family. So it's related to garlic mustard and wintercress. And I'm happy to tell you there are no poisonous members of the mustard family that grow in New England. And so as long as you're sure it's a mustard family plant, it's okay to eat. And I really enjoy these Dames Rocket flowers just raw, straight into your mouth, or put into salads or used for decorating other foods. They're quite good. Now let's add this to the compost pile. So I wouldn't do that with garlic mustard, by the way. Yeah.
Bag it and keep it separate.
Right,
Yes.
right. Dames Rocket, though, it's
Yes.
okay. I have been leading walks here for many years talking about the edibility of plants and talking about edible weeds and invasives as well as natives, but this has been an excellent showpiece to show off native plants, and this is a place where people can walk and appreciate the plants. So I hope you've enjoyed this little excursion we've had along Riverwalk with me this morning and learned a few things about these edible plants that we've encountered along the way. And I hope that we'll be able to get together in person sometime and do some more wild edibles here along Riverwalk in Great Barrington, or some other spot along some other river in the future. So thank you very much.